The wagon wheel cracked on the fourth day of travel, leaving Fiona Owens stranded in the middle of nowhere with nothing but prairie grass stretching toward mountains she could not name, and a canteen that held maybe 2 more swallows of water. She stood beside her broken wagon in the Colorado Territory heat of July 1872, squinting against the merciless sun, wondering if this was how her journey would end before it properly began. The oxen huffed and stamped, as miserable as she felt, and her carefully packed belongings sat useless in a wagon that could go nowhere. She had left St. Louis 3 months ago with a teaching position waiting in Central City, or so the letter had promised, but now she wondered if she would ever see another living soul again. The sound of hoofbeats made her spin around, hand flying to her throat. A rider approached from the east, silhouetted against the bright sky, and Fiona found herself caught between relief and fear. Out here, a stranger could mean salvation or something far worse. She stood her ground, shoulders back, trying to look more confident than she felt. The rider slowed as he approached, and Fiona got her first clear look at him. He sat tall in the saddle, a man perhaps in his late 20s with sun-darkened skin and dark hair that curled slightly beneath his wide-brimmed hat. His eyes, she noticed as he came closer, were an unexpected shade of green that seemed to catch the light. He wore the practical clothing of a working rancher, his shirt dusty from travel, and a careful expression that suggested he was taking her measure just as she was taking his. "Looks like you have some trouble," he said, his voice a low drawl that carried easily across the space between them. He dismounted with an easy grace, looping his horse's reins loosely around his hand. "My wagon wheel broke," Fiona said, hating how her voice wavered slightly. She cleared her throat. "I was heading to Central City. I do not suppose you could tell me how far it is." He walked around the wagon, examining the broken wheel with a practiced eye. "Central City is about 30 miles northwest of here. You are not going to make it there with this wheel, though." He straightened, pulling off his hat to wipe his forehead with his sleeve. "I am Xavier Callahan. My ranch is about 5 miles south. I can take you there, get you some water and food, and we can figure out what to do about your wagon and your oxen." Fiona hesitated. Everything she owned was in this wagon, and accepting help from a stranger went against every warning she had received before leaving St. Louis. But the alternative was staying here in the heat with no water and no hope of fixing the wheel herself. "I am Fiona Owens," she said finally. "I would be grateful for the help, Mr. Callahan." Something shifted in his expression, a slight softening around his eyes. "Call me Xavier. Let me get your oxen unhitched and tied to the back of my horse. You will ride with me, and we can send someone back for the wagon once we get to the ranch." She watched as he worked, his movements efficient and sure. He spoke quietly to the oxen as he unhitched them, his hands gentle despite their obvious strength. When he finished, he turned to her and held out his hand. "We will need to ride double, if that is all right with you, Miss Owens." "Fiona," she heard herself say. "If I am to call you Xavier, you should call me Fiona." He smiled then, a slow smile that transformed his face entirely. "Fiona it is." He mounted first, then reached down to help her up. She placed her hand in his, feeling the calluses on his palm, the warmth of his skin, and then she was swinging up behind him. The horse shifted beneath them, adjusting to the extra weight, and Fiona had no choice but to hold onto Xavier's waist to keep her balance. "Hold tight," he said, and she could hear the smile in his voice even though she could not see his face. They rode south through the afternoon heat, the oxen plodding along behind them. Xavier pointed out landmarks as they went, a particular rock formation, a creek bed that ran full in spring, the distant peaks of the Rockies. His voice was steady and calm, and Fiona found herself relaxing slightly, her initial fear giving way to cautious curiosity. "What brings you to Central City?" he asked after a while. "A teaching position. At least I hope it still exists. I am 3 weeks late already." "The schoolhouse there could use a good teacher. The last one left to get married, and the children have been running wild ever since." "You know Central City well." "I go there for supplies every few weeks. It is the closest town to my ranch." "How long have you had your ranch?" "5 years now. I came out here from Missouri after the war, looking for a fresh start. Found a good piece of land with water and decent grazing, built a house and barn, started collecting cattle. It is not much, but it is mine." There was pride in his voice and something else, a contentment that Fiona envied. She had been running from St. Louis, from memories she wanted to escape, from a life that had grown too small and suffocating. She wondered what Xavier had left behind in Missouri. The ranch appeared gradually, first as a distant smudge against the landscape, then resolving into a house, a barn, several outbuildings and corrals. It was not large, but it looked well maintained and sturdy. Smoke rose from the chimney, suggesting someone else was there. "That will be my ranch hand, Miguel," Xavier said, following her gaze. "He has been with me for 3 years. Good man, hard worker." They rode into the yard, and a man emerged from the barn. He was shorter than Xavier, with black hair and a weathered face that creased into a smile when he saw them. "Xavier, you are back early and with company." His English carried the melodic accent of his Spanish heritage. "Found her stranded about 5 miles north. Broken wagon wheel. Miguel, this is Fiona Owens. Fiona, this is Miguel Reyes." Fiona slid down from the horse, her legs wobbly from the ride. Miguel reached out to steady her, his grip firm and respectful. "Welcome, Miss Owens. You look like you could use some water and a place to sit down." "Both would be wonderful, thank you." Xavier dismounted and handed his horse's reins to Miguel. "Can you see to the oxen? Get them some water and feed. I will show Fiona inside." The house was simple but comfortable, with a main room that served as kitchen and living space, and 2 doors that presumably led to bedrooms. The furniture was handmade but well crafted, and everything was surprisingly neat for a bachelor household. A pot bubbled on the stove, filling the room with the smell of something savory. "Sit," Xavier said, gesturing to the table. He pumped water into a cup and brought it to her, then ladled stew into a bowl. "Eat something. You look half-starved." Fiona wanted to protest, to maintain some dignity, but her stomach betrayed her with a loud growl. She drank the water gratefully, then picked up the spoon. The stew was simple but good, thick with meat and vegetables, and she ate more than she meant to, barely pausing between bites. Xavier sat across from her, a slight smile playing at the corners of his mouth. "When did you last eat a proper meal?" 2 days ago. "I have been rationing my supplies, trying to make them last until I reached Central City." His expression darkened slightly. "You should not have been traveling alone. It is dangerous out here for a woman on her own." "I did not have much choice. I had to leave St. Louis, and I could not afford to hire an escort." She said it more sharply than she intended, and Xavier held up his hands in a gesture of peace. "I was not criticizing, just stating a fact, but you are safe now. You can rest here tonight, and tomorrow we will figure out the best way to get you to Central City." "I cannot impose on your hospitality like that." "You are not imposing. We have a spare room. Miguel sleeps in the barn by choice, says he likes being near the animals. The room is yours for as long as you need it." Fiona wanted to argue, but exhaustion was catching up with her now that she had food in her stomach and a roof over her head. The thought of a real bed, of being safe for a night, was almost overwhelmingly appealing. "Thank you," she said quietly. "I appreciate your kindness." It is not kindness. It is what any decent person would do. But Fiona knew that was not true. She had seen enough of the world to know that decency was not as common as Xavier seemed to think. She studied him across the table, trying to understand this man who had stopped to help a stranger without hesitation, who had brought her to his home and offered food and shelter without expecting anything in return. "What?" Xavier asked, catching her staring. "I am just trying to figure you out." "Not much to figure. I am a simple man living a simple life." "I doubt that." His smile widened. "Maybe you are right, but we have time for you to learn the truth of it, I suppose." The door opened and Miguel came in, nodding approvingly when he saw Fiona's empty bowl. "The oxen are settled." "I checked the wagon wheel. It is badly broken, but I can fix it if I have a few days and the right wood." "We have some good oak stored in the barn," Xavier said. "You think you can make it work? I can try. But it might be better to take Miss Owens to Central City first, then go back for the wagon afterward." "That makes sense. We can take her in the morning. Central City is not far on horseback." Fiona felt a strange pang at the thought of leaving already, which was ridiculous. She had just arrived, and she had a job waiting for her in Central City. There was no reason to want to stay at this isolated ranch with a man she had just met. But she did want to stay, she realized. Something about this place, about Xavier, made her feel more at ease than she had in months. "I should at least help with the dishes," she said, standing and reaching for her empty bowl. "You are our guest," Xavier protested, but she shook her head. "I have been traveling for months, taking care of myself. Let me help. It will make me feel less useless." He studied her for a moment, then nodded. "All right, if it means that much to you." They worked together in comfortable silence, Xavier washing and Fiona drying and putting away the dishes where he directed. Miguel had disappeared back outside, muttering something about checking on the cattle. The light outside was fading, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple. "It is beautiful here," Fiona said, looking out the window. "So open and vast. In St. Louis there were always buildings, always people. I never saw horizons like these. That is why I love it, the space, the freedom. Every morning I wake up and look out at land that is mine, and I cannot quite believe my luck." "You said you came here after the war. Did you fight?" His hands stilled in the wash water. "I did. Union Army 3 years. Saw things I wish I could forget." "I am sorry. I should not have asked." "No, it is all right. It is just. The war left marks on all of us who lived through it. Coming out here, building something new, it has been a way to heal, I suppose, to focus on creation instead of destruction." Fiona understood that impulse more than she could say. She had her own things she was trying to leave behind, her own reasons for seeking a new beginning in a wild, rough place like Central City. "What are you running from, Fiona?" The question was quiet, almost gentle, but it cut straight through her defenses. She put down the dish she had been drying, gripping the counter for support. "How do you know I am running from something?" "Because no woman travels alone across half the country unless she is running toward something very good or away from something very bad. And the look in your eyes says it is the latter." She turned to face him, finding his green eyes steady and without judgment. "My father died 6 months ago. He was all the family I had left. He left debts I could not pay. Creditors were circling, and there was a man, a business associate of my father's, who offered to settle the debts if I would marry him. He was not a kind man. I found the teaching position advertised in a newspaper and wrote immediately. When they offered me the job, I sold everything I could, bought a wagon and oxen, and left." Xavier dried his hands on a towel, his expression thoughtful. "This man, will he come looking for you?" "I do not think so. I am not worth that much trouble. But I made it clear I would rather starve than marry him." "Good for you." Xavier's voice was fierce, and Fiona felt something warm bloom in her chest at his approval. Any man who would try to force a woman into marriage is not worth the air he breathes. They stood there in the growing darkness, looking at each other, and Fiona felt the connection between them strengthen, deepen. This man was a stranger, she reminded herself. She had known him for mere hours. But somehow it felt like more than that, like something fundamental had shifted when she first saw him riding toward her across the prairie. "I should show you where you will be sleeping," Xavier said, breaking the moment. His voice was slightly rough, as if he too had felt the intensity of that shared gaze. The spare room was small but clean, with a narrow bed covered in a patchwork quilt, a dresser, and a window that looked out toward the mountains. Someone had already brought in her carpet bag from the wagon. "Miguel must have grabbed it," Xavier said, seeing her surprised look. "He is thoughtful that way. There is a basin and pitcher for washing. If you need anything else, my room is just across the hall." "This is perfect. Thank you, Xavier, for everything." He paused in the doorway, his hand on the frame. "Get some rest, Fiona. Tomorrow we will get you to Central City and you can start your new life." But as Fiona lay in the narrow bed a short while later, listening to the unfamiliar sounds of the ranch settling in for the night, she found herself wondering if Central City was really where her new life was meant to begin. Or if perhaps it had already started here, in this rough house on a lonely ranch, with a green-eyed rancher who had stopped to help a stranger in need. She fell asleep thinking of Xavier's smile, of the way his hands had moved so gently as he worked with the oxen, of the pride in his voice when he spoke of his ranch. And she dreamed of wide open spaces and endless horizons. Morning came too early, sunlight streaming through the window and the sound of voices outside pulling Fiona from sleep. She dressed quickly in her second-best dress, brushed and pinned her hair as neatly as she could without a proper mirror, and emerged to find Xavier and Miguel already at the table, eating breakfast. "Good morning," Xavier said, standing when he saw her. "I hope we did not wake you." "The sun woke me. I am not used to seeing so much of it." Miguel grinned. "You will get used to it out here. Everything is bigger and brighter. Sit, eat. Xavier makes terrible eggs but acceptable bacon." "My eggs are not terrible," Xavier protested, but he was smiling as he filled a plate for Fiona. "They are just a little crispy." The eggs were indeed overcooked, but Fiona ate them without complaint. The bacon was good and there was fresh bread that Miguel claimed credit for. The easy banter between the two men made her smile. They had the comfortable relationship of people who had worked together long enough to become friends. "So," Miguel said, looking between Fiona and Xavier with knowing eyes, "you are taking Miss Owens to Central City today. That is the plan." "I thought we would leave after breakfast, get there by early afternoon." "And the wagon? Can you start working on the wheel? I will come back tomorrow with lumber if you need it. I will do my best." They finished breakfast and Xavier saddled his horse, a different one than he had ridden yesterday. This one was a sturdy bay gelding with a calm disposition. "This is Copper," Xavier said, patting the horse's neck. "He is steady and reliable. You will ride easier on him than on my cutting horse." Once again, Fiona found herself seated behind Xavier, her arms around his waist, her body pressed against his back. She tried to ignore the way her heart sped up at the contact, the way she was hyper-aware of every breath he took. This was practical, nothing more, just a ride to town. But as they left the ranch behind and headed northwest toward Central City, Fiona could not help wishing the journey was longer. Xavier talked as they rode, telling her about the ranch, about the challenges of raising cattle in this rough country, about the neighbors who were spread out across the landscape like distant stars. He told her about the winter storms that could bury the land in snow overnight, about the spring when wildflowers covered the prairie in impossible colors, about the hawks that circled overhead and the coyotes that sang at night. "You love it here," Fiona said. It was not a question. "I do. I know it seems harsh to someone coming from a city, but to me it is paradise. Every morning I wake up and I am grateful. For the land, for the work, for the freedom to build something that is entirely my own. That must be a wonderful feeling. It is, though sometimes." He trailed off, and Fiona waited, curious. "Sometimes I wish I had someone to share it with. Miguel is a good friend, but it is not the same as having a real partner, someone to build a life with, to work beside, to grow old with." Fiona's arms tightened slightly around his waist. "I am sure you will find someone. Maybe. Most of the women around here are already married or too young, and I am too busy with the ranch to spend much time courting, but I am in no rush. The right person will come along when the time is right." They crested a hill and Central City came into view, spread out in a valley below them. It was larger than Fiona had expected, a proper town with a main street lined with buildings, side streets branching off, and houses scattered around the edges. Smoke rose from chimneys, and even from this distance she could see people moving about, going about their daily business. "There she is," Xavier said. "Central City. Born from gold mining, though most of the big strikes were years ago. Now, it is mostly a supply center for the ranches and smaller mines in the area. You will find everything you need there." As they descended the hill and entered the town proper, Fiona took in her new home with eager eyes. There was the general store, the hotel, a saloon, a church with a white steeple, and there, set back from the main street, a small schoolhouse with a bell tower. Xavier guided Copper down the main street, nodding to people they passed. Several folks stared at Fiona with open curiosity, and she tried to sit up straighter to look respectable despite her travel-worn dress and the fact that she was riding double with a man. "Where should I take you?" Xavier asked. "The school, the hotel, the school, I suppose. I should introduce myself to whoever is in charge." Xavier directed Copper toward the schoolhouse, dismounting when they reached it and helping Fiona down. Her legs were stiff from riding and she stumbled slightly. Xavier caught her, his hands warm on her arms, steadying her. "All right?" he asked, his face close to hers. "Yes, thank you." They stood there for a moment too long, neither moving, and Fiona found herself noticing details. The faint scar on Xavier's jaw, the way his eyes had small gold flecks mixed with the green, the shape of his mouth, firm but not harsh. A throat cleared behind them and they sprang apart. A woman stood on the schoolhouse steps, middle-aged with graying hair pulled back in a severe bun and sharp eyes that missed nothing. "Xavier Callahan," she said, her voice carrying a note of amusement. "Always helpful, aren't you?" "And who is this young lady, Mrs. Henderson?" "This is Fiona Owens. She is the new teacher, or I hope she still is. She was delayed on her journey." Mrs. Henderson's expression transformed from amused suspicion to delight. "Miss Owens, we had nearly given up hope. Come in, come in. We have so much to discuss." Fiona glanced back at Xavier, suddenly reluctant to leave him. "Thank you for everything. I do not know how I can repay you. No repayment needed, but I will be back in a few days with your wagon once Miguel has the wheel repaired. I will check on you then, make sure you are settling in all right." "I would like that." Mrs. Henderson cleared her throat again, more pointedly this time, and Fiona hurried up the steps. But she looked back once more, finding Xavier still standing there, watching her with an expression she could not quite read. He raised his hand in farewell, mounted Copper, and rode away. "Well," Mrs. Henderson said, following Fiona's gaze, "that is interesting. Xavier Callahan has been a bachelor since he came to this territory, and I have never seen him look at a woman the way he was looking at you just now. "You are mistaken," Fiona said, but her cheeks felt warm. "He was just helping me. My wagon broke down and he happened to find me." "Hum. If you say so, dear. Come inside and let me show you the school, and then we will get you settled at the boarding house." The school was a single large room with rows of desks, a wood stove in one corner and a blackboard at the front. There were shelves of books, slates and chalk, maps on the walls. It was everything Fiona had hoped for and more. "We have 23 students enrolled," Mrs. Henderson explained. She was the mayor's wife, apparently, and had taken charge of school matters after the previous teacher left. Ages 6 to 14. "Some of them are a bit behind in their learning, I will warn you, and a few of the older boys might test you at first, but I think you will manage just fine." They discussed schedules and curriculum, supplies and expectations. Fiona's teaching certificate from St. Louis was sufficient, and her starting salary would be $35 a month plus room and board at the local boarding house. It was not much, but it was more than enough for her needs. Mrs. Henderson walked her to the boarding house, a large building run by a formidable woman named Mrs. Carter, who immediately took Fiona under her wing. Her room was small but comfortable, with a view of the mountains and a writing desk by the window. "You will take your meals with us," Mrs. Carter said. "Breakfast at 7, dinner at noon if you can make it between classes, supper at 6. Clean linens once a week, laundry extra if you need it. No gentlemen callers in your room, of course, though you are welcome to entertain in the parlor with the door open." Fiona assured her she had no intention of entertaining gentlemen callers, which made Mrs. Henderson and Mrs. Carter exchanged knowing looks that she pretended not to see. The next few days passed in a blur of activity. Fiona met the school board, reviewed her curriculum, prepared her classroom. The children would start in 1 week, giving her time to organize and settle in. The town was friendly, with people stopping her on the street to introduce themselves and welcome her. She met shopkeepers and ranchers' wives, the doctor and the pastor, and what felt like dozens of curious children who would soon be her students. But through it all, she found her thoughts drifting back to Xavier. She wondered what he was doing, if the ranch was running smoothly, if he thought of her at all. She told herself she was being foolish, that she had a job to do and a new life to build here in Central City. Xavier had his ranch and his own life. Their paths had crossed briefly, but now they would diverge. On the 4th day, Miguel arrived with her wagon. The wheel was repaired, beautifully crafted to match the others, and all her belongings were intact. "Xavier told me to bring it to you," Miguel said as he helped unload her things into her boarding house room. "He has been busy with a sick cow, or he would have come himself." "How is he?" The question came out before Fiona could stop herself. Miguel's eyes twinkled. "He is well, though he has been distracted. Keeps staring off into the distance, forgetting what he is doing. Not like him at all." Fiona busied herself with organizing her books so Miguel would not see her smile. When everything was unloaded, Miguel tipped his hat to her. "It was nice to meet you properly, Miss Owens. You are welcome at the ranch anytime." "Thank you, Miguel, and thank you for fixing my wagon." "My pleasure. Xavier paid me extra for the work, even though I told him it was unnecessary. He is generous that way." After Miguel left, Fiona stood in her room surrounded by her belongings and felt strangely hollow. This was what she had wanted, what she had traveled so far to achieve. A teaching position, a fresh start, independence. But something was missing, some piece that would make it all feel complete. She knew what that piece was, or rather, who it was. But admitting it felt dangerous, like opening a door she might not be able to close again. The school opened the following Monday, and Fiona threw herself into teaching with determined enthusiasm. Her students were a mixed bunch. some eager to learn and others clearly wishing they were anywhere else. The older boys tested her, as Mrs. Henderson had warned, but Fiona had dealt with difficult students in St. Louis, and she knew how to handle them with a combination of firmness and respect. She fell into a routine. Wake early, prepare for the day, teach from 8 until 3 with a break for lunch, then spend the evening reviewing lessons and preparing for the next day. On Sundays, she attended church and took walks around town, getting to know her new home better. It was a good life. She was doing meaningful work. She had a comfortable place to live, and she was starting to make friends among the townspeople. But she could not stop thinking about Xavier, about the ranch, about the way his eyes had lit up when he talked about the land he loved. 3 weeks after she had started teaching, Xavier came to town for supplies. Fiona was coming out of the general store with some chalk and new slate pencils when she saw him across the street, loading sacks into his wagon. Her heart jumped in her chest and she found herself walking toward him before she consciously decided to do so. Xavier. He turned at the sound of her voice and his whole face brightened. Fiona, I was hoping I might run into you. How are you? How is the teaching going? It is wonderful. The children are challenging but eager to learn, most of them, and Central City has been very welcoming. I am glad to hear it. You look well, happy. I am, and you, how is the ranch? Busy as always. The cattle are doing well. We have a new calf, and I am starting to think about expanding the herd next year. He paused, then said in a rush, Would you like to have dinner? I mean, would you like to join me for dinner? There is a restaurant here, nothing fancy, but the food is decent. Fiona's heart was doing strange things in her chest. I would like that very much. They went to the small restaurant attached to the hotel, where the owner's wife served them steak and potatoes and greens from her garden. Xavier asked about her students, and she found herself telling him stories from her classroom, about little Emma, who was brilliant at arithmetic, about Thomas, who struggled with reading but had a gift for drawing, about Sarah and John, who were twins and constantly trying to switch places to confuse her. Xavier laughed at her stories, and the sound made something in Fiona's chest loosen and warm. He told her about the ranch, about the new calf that Miguel had named Pequeño despite it being one of the largest calves born that season, about his plans to build a new barn next summer, about the neighboring rancher who kept trying to buy his land. They talked until the restaurant owner started giving them pointed looks, and they realized they were the only customers left. Outside, dusk was falling and the street lamps were being lit. I should walk you back to your boarding house, Xavier said. They walked slowly, neither seeming eager for the evening to end. The town was quieting down, most people heading home for their own suppers, and the air had cooled to a pleasant temperature. I missed you, Xavier said suddenly. I mean, I miss talking to you, having dinner like this. I missed you too, Fiona admitted. More than I probably should have, considering we only knew each other for one day. Sometimes one day is enough, to know that someone is special, that they could become important to you, if you let them. They had reached the boarding house and stood on the porch, the light from the windows spilling around them. Fiona looked up at Xavier, at his earnest green eyes, at the hope and uncertainty in his expression. Xavier, I am not sure what to do. I just got here. I am just starting this job. I do not know if I should be thinking about anything else right now. I understand, and I do not want to pressure you or make things complicated, but I would like to see you again, if you are willing. We could take things slow, just spend time together when I am in town and see what happens. No expectations, no pressure, just two people getting to know each other better. It was exactly what Fiona wanted, what she had been afraid to admit she wanted. She reached out and took his hand, feeling his fingers close around hers. I would like that, she said. His smile was worth every moment of uncertainty. Then I will come back next week, and the week after that, for as long as you are willing to have dinner with me. That might be a very long time. I certainly hope so. He lifted her hand to his lips, pressing a gentle kiss to her knuckles, and Fiona felt the touch all the way to her toes. Then he stepped back, released her hand, and tipped his hat. Until next week, Fiona. Until next week, Xavier. She watched him walk back to his wagon, watched him drive out of town, and stood on the porch long after he had disappeared into the darkening landscape. Mrs. Carter came out eventually, a knowing smile on her face. That is Xavier Callahan, isn't it? Fine man. Good ranch, steady work ethic, kind heart. You could do worse, Miss Owens. We are just having dinner, Fiona protested weakly. Of course you are, dear. Of course you are. True to his word, Xavier came to town the following week, and the week after that. Sometimes they had dinner at the restaurant. Sometimes they just walked together, talking about everything and nothing. Xavier told her about growing up in Missouri, about his family farm that had been destroyed during the war, about his decision to come west and start over. Fiona told him about her childhood in St. Louis, about her mother who had died when she was young, about her father who had been loving but impractical with money. The weeks turned into months. Summer faded into fall, and Fiona's students settled into their routines. She was no longer the new teacher but an established part of the community, someone people waved to on the street and stopped to chat with at the general store. And Xavier was no longer just the rancher who had helped her when her wagon broke down. He was becoming something much more significant, something that both thrilled and terrified her. One Sunday in late October, Xavier invited her to the ranch. "I would like you to see it properly," he said, "to understand what my life is really like out there. Miguel has been asking about you too. He wants to know if you are feeding me properly during our dinners." Fiona laughed. "Tell Miguel I do my best, but you are very stubborn about paying for everything, as any gentleman should." She borrowed a horse from the livery and rode out to the ranch with Xavier. The autumn air crisp and clean, the aspens turning gold on the mountainsides. The ranch looked different in the fall light, more beautiful somehow, the buildings warm and welcoming against the vast landscape. Miguel greeted her with enthusiasm, insisting on showing her around personally. He introduced her to the cattle, to the horses, to the chickens and the barn cat, and the new calf that was indeed enormous. Xavier watched with barely concealed amusement as Miguel chattered away, clearly delighted to have a visitor. "Now you see what I deal with every day," Xavier said when Miguel finally ran out of steam. "He never stops talking." "I talk because you do not talk enough," Miguel retorted. Someone has to fill the silence. They had dinner together, all three of them, and Fiona felt something settle in her chest. This felt right. This felt like home in a way her boarding house room never had, in a way St. Louis had stopped feeling long before she left. After dinner, while Miguel cleaned up despite their protests, Xavier walked Fiona out to the porch. The sun was setting, painting the sky in brilliant shades of orange and pink and purple, and the first stars were appearing overhead. "This is my favorite time of day," Xavier said quietly. "When the work is done and the land settles in for the night, I like to sit out here and just breathe." Fiona leaned against the porch rail, taking in the view. "I can see why. It is magical, Fiona." Xavier's voice was serious now, and she turned to look at him. "I need to tell you something. I have been trying to take this slow, to give you time to settle in and figure out what you want. But I cannot keep it in any longer. I am falling in love with you. Maybe I started falling that first day when you stood by your broken wagon looking fierce and frightened at the same time. You are smart and brave and kind, and you make me laugh, and I think about you constantly when we are apart. I know it is fast. I know we have only known each other a few months, but that is how I feel. Fiona's heart was racing. She had known this was coming, had felt the same pull, the same growing attachment. But hearing Xavier say the words made it real in a way it had not been before. "I am falling in love with you too," she said, and watched his eyes widen with hope and joy. "I have been trying to deny it, trying to focus on my job and my new life here. But the truth is, the reason Central City has started to feel like home is because you are here. Or rather, you are nearby. When I think about my future now, you are always in it." Xavier closed the distance between them in 2 strides, taking her hands in his. "I want to court you properly. I want to take you to church socials and dances. I want everyone in Central City to know that you are my girl. I want to build toward a future together. If that is what you want too." "It is," Fiona said, her voice breaking slightly. "It is exactly what I want." He cupped her face in his hands, his thumbs brushing her cheeks, and lowered his lips to hers. The kiss was gentle at first, tentative, a question as much as a statement. But Fiona rose on her toes and kissed him back, and then it deepened, became something heated and full of promise. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Xavier rested his forehead against hers. "I have wanted to do that for months. So have I. Miguel is probably watching from the window. Let him watch." Xavier laughed and kissed her again, and Fiona thought that she had never been happier than she was in this moment, on this porch, with this man who had become her whole world without her quite realizing when it had happened. The courtship that followed was everything Fiona could have hoped for. Xavier came to town every Sunday after church, and they would have dinner together or take walks or sit in the boarding house parlor and talk. He came to the school once and watched Fiona teach, and afterward he told her she was a natural, that the children clearly loved and respected her. They went to the harvest dance together in November, and Xavier proved to be a surprisingly good dancer. Fiona wore her best dress, dark blue wool with black trim, and Xavier wore a suit that he admitted he had bought specially for the occasion. They danced every dance together, scandalizing some of the older folks and delighting others who declared them a perfect match. "Are you going to marry him?" Emma, one of Fiona's youngest students, asked the following Monday. "Everyone says you are going to marry Mr. Callahan." "That is between Mr. Callahan and myself," Fiona said firmly, but she was blushing. As winter approached and the first snows fell, Fiona found herself more and more certain that Xavier was the man she wanted to spend her life with. He was steady and kind, hard-working and honest, with a sense of humor that caught her off guard and a gentleness that made her feel cherished. When she was with him, the world made sense in a way it never had before. On Christmas Eve, Xavier came to town and found Fiona just as she was leaving the schoolhouse. She had been decorating for the Christmas program her students would perform the next day, and there were pine boughs and ribbons everywhere. "It looks beautiful," Xavier said, taking in her work. "The children are very excited. Half of them will forget their lines, but it will be wonderful anyway. I have something for you." Xavier reached into his coat and pulled out a small wrapped package. "I know we are supposed to exchange gifts tomorrow, but I wanted to give you this privately." Fiona opened the package with trembling fingers. Inside was a delicate silver chain with a small pendant, a star engraved with tiny details. "It is beautiful," she breathed. "I had it made specially. The star is because you light up my life, and because out here under these big skies, the stars are what guide us home. You are my guiding star, Fiona. You lead me home even when I do not realize I am lost." Tears pricked Fiona's eyes. "Help me put it on." Xavier fastened the chain around her neck, his fingers gentle on her skin. Then he turned her to face him, his hands on her shoulders. "Fiona Owens, I love you more than I thought it was possible to love another person. You have made this last half-year the happiest of my life. I know I should wait. I know we have not been courting for very long, but I am not a patient man when it comes to things I want. And I want you. I want to wake up next to you every morning and go to sleep beside you every night. I want to build a life with you, raise children with you, grow old with you. Will you marry me?" Fiona's hands flew to her mouth, her eyes wide. This was fast, maybe too fast by society's standards. But she knew her answer, had known it for weeks if she was honest with herself. "Yes," she said, her voice muffled by her hands. She dropped them and said more clearly, "Yes, Xavier, I will marry you." His whoop of joy echoed through the empty schoolhouse. He picked her up and spun her around, both of them laughing, and then he was kissing her, and she was kissing him back, and it felt like the beginning of everything she had ever wanted. They were married in the church in Central City on a cold January day in 1873. Mrs. Henderson and Mrs. Carter had taken charge of the arrangements, and despite the short notice, it was a lovely ceremony. Fiona wore a new dress of cream-colored silk that the town dressmaker had worked on day and night, and Xavier wore his suit with a new vest that Miguel claimed credit for choosing. Miguel stood up as Xavier's best man, beaming with pride, and Mrs. Henderson stood with Fiona. The church was packed with townspeople and neighboring ranchers, all come to witness the marriage of the teacher and the rancher who had captured her heart. "Do you, Xavier Callahan, take this woman to be your lawfully wedded wife?" the pastor asked. "I do," Xavier said firmly, his eyes never leaving Fiona's face. "And do you, Fiona Owens, take this man to be your lawfully wedded husband?" "I do," Fiona said, her voice clear and sure. "Then by the power vested in me, I pronounce you husband and wife. Xavier, you may kiss your bride." And he did, thoroughly and enthusiastically, to the applause and cheers of the assembled guests. The reception was held at the hotel, with food and music and dancing. Fiona danced with Xavier, with Miguel, with the mayor and several of her students' fathers, and even with old Mr. Thompson, who was 80 if he was a day. Everyone wanted to congratulate them, to wish them well, to tell them how perfect they were together. As the evening wound down and they prepared to leave for the ranch, for what was now Fiona's home as well as Xavier's, Mrs. Henderson pulled Fiona aside. "You have made a good choice," she said quietly. "Xavier Callahan is one of the finest men I know. Be happy, dear. You deserve it." "Thank you," Fiona said, hugging the older woman, "for everything. For taking a chance on me when I showed up late, for helping with the wedding, for being such a good friend. It has been my pleasure. Now go. Your husband is waiting." Xavier had borrowed a covered sleigh for the occasion, with blankets and hot bricks to keep them warm on the ride to the ranch. Snow was falling gently, turning the world into something magical and new. Fiona snuggled against Xavier's side as he drove, his arm around her, and thought that she had never been so perfectly content. "Happy?" Xavier asked, kissing the top of her head. "More than I can say. How did I get so lucky? I am the lucky one. I was just a lonely rancher with a broken wagon wheel away from spending the rest of my life alone. You changed everything, Fiona. You are everything." They arrived at the ranch to find Miguel had discreetly made himself scarce, leaving a note that he would be staying in town overnight to give them privacy. The house was warm and welcoming, with a fire burning in the hearth and lanterns lit. Xavier carried Fiona over the threshold, making her laugh and protest that it was not necessary. But he insisted, saying some traditions were important, and carried her all the way to their bedroom. Their wedding night was everything Fiona had hoped for and more. Xavier was gentle and patient, mindful of her innocence, and by the time the night faded into dawn, Fiona understood what it meant to be truly joined with another person, body and soul. She woke to find Xavier watching her, his green eyes soft with love and satisfaction. "Good morning, Mrs. Callahan." "Good morning, Mr. Callahan." She tested out the name, her new name, and found she liked the sound of it. "Regrets? Not a single one. You? Never. Though I should probably tell you that being a rancher's wife is hard work. Early mornings, late nights, helping with whatever needs doing. It is not an easy life. I am not afraid of hard work. And besides, I get to keep teaching if I want to, right? That was the agreement, of course. The school board already agreed you could continue as long as you wanted. Though maybe not forever. I am hoping we will have children eventually, and you might want to focus on them rather than other people's children." "Children," Fiona repeated, the word filling her with warmth and possibility. "I would like that, though not right away. Let me finish out this school year at least. Whatever you want, love, we have all the time in the world." But as it turned out, they did not have quite as much time as they thought. By early spring, Fiona realized she was pregnant. The morning sickness gave it away first, then the fatigue, and finally the missed monthly courses that confirmed her suspicion. She told Xavier one evening after dinner as they sat together on the porch watching the sunset. It had become their ritual, this quiet time together at the end of each day. "I have some news," she said, her hand resting on her still flat stomach. Xavier looked at her, saw where her hand was, and his eyes went wide. "Are you?" "I am. The doctor confirmed it yesterday when I went to town. We are going to have a baby in the fall." Xavier let out a whoop that startled the horses in the corral. He pulled Fiona into his arms, holding her carefully as if she might break. "A baby. We are going to have a baby. Fiona, that is wonderful. Are you happy? I know we said we would wait, but—" "I am thrilled," Fiona assured him. "Surprised, but thrilled. Though I will need to tell the school board soon. I can probably teach through the end of the term in June, but I will not be able to continue after that. The children will miss you, but they will understand. And maybe in a few years, if you want to, you could go back to teaching. Maybe. Right now, I am just trying to wrap my mind around being a mother." Xavier pressed his hand over hers, over the place where their child was growing. "You are going to be an amazing mother, patient and kind and smart. Our child is so lucky." The pregnancy progressed smoothly, though Fiona found the summer heat more oppressive than she had expected. She spent her days helping around the ranch as much as she could, though Xavier and Miguel conspired to keep her from doing anything too strenuous. She tended the vegetable garden, fed the chickens, helped with the cooking and mending, and felt herself settling into this life in a way that felt completely natural. In late September, as the aspens turned gold on the mountains and the air took on the crisp quality of approaching fall, Fiona went into labor. Xavier rode to town for the doctor while Miguel stayed with Fiona, talking to her calmly, bringing her water, helping her walk when the pains got too intense for her to sit still. The doctor arrived just in time, and by midnight, Fiona had delivered a healthy baby boy. Xavier held his son with shaking hands, tears streaming down his face, and Fiona fell even more deeply in love with her husband in that moment. "What should we name him?" Xavier asked, his voice rough with emotion. "I was thinking James, after your father." Xavier looked up at her, surprised. "You remembered." "Of course I remembered. You said he was a good man who taught you the value of hard work and honesty. I want our son to carry his name. James Callahan." Xavier tested the name. "I like it. James Xavier Callahan." Baby James was a good baby, easy-tempered and healthy, with his father's green eyes and his mother's dark hair. He grew quickly, reaching for things and smiling and making the ranch house ring with his cries and gurgles. Miguel was completely besotted with the baby, insisting on holding him whenever possible and singing Spanish lullabies that made James fall asleep almost instantly. "You have a gift," Fiona told him one day, watching as Miguel rocked the sleeping baby. "I have 8 younger siblings," Miguel said with a grin. "I know babies, though I must say this one is particularly handsome." "We think so," Xavier said dryly, but he was smiling. The years passed in a blur of work and love and growth. James was joined by a sister, Sarah. 2 years later, and then another brother, Daniel, 2 years after that. The ranch prospered, with Xavier expanding the herd and building the new barn he had planned. Miguel eventually married a widow from town, a kind woman named Rosa who had 2 children of her own, and Xavier built them a small house on the ranch property. Fiona had thought she might miss teaching, but she found that raising her own children was just as fulfilling, if not more so. She taught them to read and write, to do arithmetic and understand the world around them. And sometimes, when the school in Central City needed a substitute teacher, she would go in for a day or two and remember her early days there. On their 10th anniversary, Xavier surprised her with a trip to Denver. Miguel and Rosa agreed to watch the children, and Xavier and Fiona took the train to the city, staying in a fine hotel and eating in restaurants and attending a real theater production. "This is wonderful," Fiona said as they sat in their hotel room on their last night looking out over the city lights. "But I am ready to go home. To the ranch, to our children, to our life. That is where I want to be." Xavier pulled her close, kissing her temple. "Do you ever regret it? Giving up teaching, marrying me, living in the middle of nowhere?" "Never. Not for a single moment. You remember what you said to me that first day when you found me by my broken wagon. That Central City was 30 miles away. I remember. You did not tell me that the ranch was only 5 miles away, that I was much closer to something wonderful than I realized. I did not know that then, that you would be wonderful, that you would change my whole life. You told me once that I was your guiding star, but Xavier, you were mine. You still are. You led me home when I did not even know I was looking for one." They kissed as the Denver night sparkled around them, but both of them were thinking of the ranch, of the wide open spaces and endless skies, of the children sleeping safely under Rosa's watchful eye, of the life they had built together out of nothing more than a broken wagon wheel and a chance meeting. When they returned to the ranch, James, Sarah, and Daniel ran out to meet them, shouting and laughing and demanding to know what they had brought back from the city. Xavier scooped up Sarah and Daniel while James, at 8, tried to maintain his dignity while still clearly wanting to be included in the hug. "Did you miss us?" Fiona asked, gathering James close despite his protests. "Every minute," James admitted. But Rosa made good food and Uncle Miguel told us stories about Mexico. "Uncle Miguel tells the best stories," Sarah agreed. She was 6 and adored Miguel with the fierce devotion of a child who has decided someone is special. That night, after the children were in bed and the house was quiet, Fiona and Xavier sat on their porch as they had done nearly every night for the past 10 years. The stars were brilliant overhead, the air cool and clean, and somewhere in the distance, a coyote howled. "Remember when you told me this was paradise?" Fiona said, leaning against Xavier's shoulder. "I remember. I understand now. It is not just the land or the freedom or the work. It is this, us, our family, building something together that is entirely our own." "You came here needing directions to town," Xavier said softly. "And I became the town you never left." Fiona smiled at his poetic turn of phrase. "Not quite, cowboy. You became home, something better than any town could ever be." The years continued to pass, bringing changes and challenges and joys. James grew tall and strong, taking to ranching as naturally as his father had. Sarah proved to have her mother's gift for teaching and her father's head for business, a combination that would serve her well in life. Daniel, the youngest, had a gentle soul and a way with animals that made him invaluable around the ranch. When James turned 18 in 1891, Xavier officially made him a partner in the ranch. "You have earned it," he told his son. "You work as hard as any man, and this place will be yours someday. Might as well start learning the business side now." Miguel had retired from heavy ranch work by then, though he still came around regularly to check on things and offer advice. His hair was gray and his face was more lined, but his eyes still twinkled with amusement, and he still sang Spanish lullabies, now to his own grandchildren. Fiona, at 42, had a few strands of gray in her dark hair and lines at the corners of her eyes from squinting against the sun. But she was healthy and happy, still beautiful in Xavier's eyes, still the guiding star that had led him home so many years ago. "Do you ever think about how different our lives would have been if your wagon wheel had not broken?" Xavier asked one evening. They were alone on the porch, a rare occurrence now that the children were older and often out in the evenings themselves. Sarah was at a church social, Daniel was reading in his room, and James was checking on the cattle with 2 ranch hands Xavier had hired as the operation had grown. "Sometimes," Fiona admitted, "I would have made it to Central City, started teaching, built a different life. But I do not think I would have been as happy. I might not even have stayed in Colorado. Without you, there was nothing really anchoring me here. I think about it too. About how one broken wagon wheel changed everything. If I had ridden a different direction that day, if I had not decided to check the north pasture, we might never have met. But we did meet, and we fell in love, and we built this beautiful life together. No regrets." It was a question Xavier asked her every few years, always with the same slight uncertainty in his voice, as if he still could not quite believe his luck. "Not a single one," Fiona said, the same answer she had given him on their wedding night and many times since. "You? Never. You are still the best thing that ever happened to me, Fiona Callahan. And you are still the rancher who became my whole world." They sat together as the sun set, as the stars came out, as the land settled in for the night. Somewhere in the house, a clock chimed the hour. In the barn, horses moved restlessly in their stalls. In the distance, cattle lowed and night birds called. But on the porch, there was only peace, only love. Only the quiet contentment of 2 people who had found each other against all odds and built something that would last far beyond their own lifetimes. When James eventually married and brought his bride to live at the ranch, when Sarah married a schoolteacher and moved to Denver but visited often, when Daniel decided to become a veterinarian and left for school back east, Fiona and Xavier adjusted to each new phase of life together. Their love, tested by time and strengthened by shared experience, only grew deeper. On their 25th anniversary, the whole family gathered at the ranch. James and his wife Elizabeth had 3 children of their own now, ranging from 7 to 2. Sarah and her husband Thomas had 2 children and another on the way. Daniel, newly graduated and setting up his practice in Central City, brought a young woman he was courting, a bright-eyed girl who looked at him the way Fiona had once looked at Xavier. Miguel and Rosa were there, along with their children and grandchildren. Mrs. Henderson made the trip from Central City, now elderly but still sharp as ever. Several neighbors and friends came as well, until the ranch house and yard were overflowing with people, with laughter, with life. "You did good, my friend," Miguel told Xavier as they stood together watching the celebration. "Look at all this. The family you have built, the life you have created. Your father would be proud. I could not have done it without Fiona. She made all of this possible. She chose well too. You were always a good man, Xavier, but she made you better. That is what the right woman does." Xavier found Fiona in the kitchen, supervising the preparation of the anniversary dinner. She had flour on her cheek, and her hair was coming loose from its pins, and she looked absolutely beautiful. "Come with me for a minute," he said, taking her hand. "Xavier, I am in the middle of It Can Wait. Please." She let him lead her out to the porch, their porch, the place where they had shared so many conversations over the years. The party continued without them, laughter and music floating on the air. "25 years ago, I asked you to marry me in a schoolhouse in Central City," Xavier said. "I told you that you were my guiding star, that I wanted to spend my life with you. And you said yes, even though we had only known each other a few months, even though it was fast and maybe a little crazy. It was the easiest decision I ever made. I want you to know that if I had it all to do over again, I would not change a thing. Every joy, every challenge, every moment we have shared has been worth it. You are still the love of my life, Fiona. You always will be." Tears pricked Fiona's eyes. "Even after 25 years, you can still make me cry with your words. I love you, Xavier. More than I did on our wedding day, more than I did when James was born, more than I did yesterday. My love for you just keeps growing, keeps expanding, until sometimes I think my heart cannot hold it all. Then let it overflow. Let it spill out and touch everyone around us. That is what love is supposed to do, I think. Grow and spread and make the world better." They kissed as the sun set behind the mountains, as their family celebrated inside and around them, as the ranch that had brought them together stood solid and enduring. 25 years of marriage, of partnership, of love, and if they were blessed, they would have many more. The years continued their relentless march forward. Xavier's hair turned gray, then white. Fiona's face gained more lines, but her eyes remained bright and curious. They slowed down a bit, no longer able to work from dawn to dusk the way they once had, but they remained active and engaged with the ranch and their family. James took over most of the daily operations of the ranch, proving himself a capable manager and a fair boss. He expanded the operation further, adding sheep to diversify their income, and hired more hands as needed. The Callahan Ranch became known throughout Colorado as one of the most successful and well-run operations in the territory, which had become a state in 1876. On a cool October evening in 1902, 30 years after that first meeting by a broken wagon, Fiona and Xavier sat on their porch and watched their great-grandchildren play in the yard. James's eldest daughter had married young and already had 2 children of her own. The little ones shrieked and laughed, chasing each other around the yard while their parents watched from nearby. "We have been blessed," Fiona said softly. "So incredibly blessed." "We have," Xavier agreed. He was 70 now, still strong but feeling his age more than he cared to admit. Fiona was 67, her dark hair now completely white, her movements slower but still graceful. "You remember the day we met?" Fiona asked. It was a story they had told their children and grandchildren many times, but she never tired of remembering it. Every detail. "You were standing by that wagon looking lost and fierce at the same time. I thought you were the most beautiful thing I had ever seen. I thought you were my salvation. And you were, though not in the way I expected. I thought you would just give me directions to Central City. I never imagined you would become my whole world. I arrived needing directions to town," Fiona said, smiling at the memory. "And you became the town I never left, the home I had been searching for without knowing it." Xavier took her hand, his grip still firm despite the arthritis that plagued his joints. "I would do it all again, you know, every single moment. So would I." They sat together as the last light faded from the sky, as the children were called inside for supper, as the ranch settled in for the night. This porch, this view, this life, They had shared it all together for 3 decades, and they would share whatever time remained to them in the same way. Together, always together. Xavier passed away peacefully in his sleep on a winter night in 1905 with Fiona beside him. He was 73 and had lived a good, full life. The whole community mourned his loss, remembering him as a fair man, a good neighbor, a loving husband and father. Fiona grieved deeply, feeling the loss of her partner like a physical wound. But she was not alone. Her children and grandchildren surrounded her, supporting her, reminding her that Xavier lived on in all of them, in the ranch he had built, in the values he had instilled, in the love he had shared so freely. She continued to live at the ranch, refusing James's gentle suggestions that she might be more comfortable in town. "This is my home," she said firmly. "This is where Xavier and I built our life together. I am not leaving it now." She lived another 8 years, watching her grandchildren grow and her great-grandchildren multiply. She told them stories about their grandfather, about the Wild West days when Colorado was still a territory, about a broken wagon and a chance meeting that had changed everything. On a spring evening in 1913, with wildflowers blooming across the prairie and the mountains still capped with snow, Fiona sat on the porch and looked out at the land she had loved for over 40 years. She was 80 years old and tired, ready to rest. Sarah was with her, having come from Denver when it became clear her mother's time was near. She held Fiona's hand as the sun set, painting the sky in the brilliant colors that had amazed Fiona the very first time she had seen them from this porch. "Are you in pain, Mama?" Sarah asked gently. "No, sweetheart, I am just ready. Ready to see your father again. I have missed him so much. He is waiting for you, I know he is. Tell the children, all of them, that they should never take love for granted. It is the most precious thing we have. More precious than land or money or anything else. Your father taught me that. We know, Mama. You and Papa showed us every day what real love looks like." As the last light faded from the sky and the first stars appeared overhead, Fiona took her final breath. She died as she had lived for so many years, on the porch of the ranch house, looking out at the land that had become her home, thinking of the man who had become her whole world. They buried her next to Xavier in the small cemetery on the edge of the ranch property, under a large cottonwood tree that provided shade in summer and shelter in winter. The headstones were simple, just their names and dates, but James added an inscription that said everything that needed to be said. She arrived needing directions to town. He became the town she never left. Together they built a love that would last forever. The ranch continued to prosper under James's management, and eventually his children's management. The Callahan name became synonymous with quality cattle, fair dealing, and honest work. Generations of the family continued to live on and work the land that Xavier had claimed and Fiona had made a home. And on quiet evenings, when the work was done and the land settled in for the night, family members would sometimes sit on the porch and feel the presence of those who had come before. Xavier and Fiona, the foundation upon which everything else had been built. The rancher and the teacher whose chance meeting had created something beautiful and lasting. Their love story became family legend, told and retold with each generation. The broken wagon wheel was preserved and eventually displayed in the ranch house, a reminder of the moment that had changed everything. Children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren grew up hearing about the day their ancestor had found a stranded woman on the prairie and had stopped to help, never imagining that this simple act of kindness would lead to the love of his life. The ranch remained in the family for over 100 years, through wars and depressions and changing times. But the core values that Xavier and Fiona had established, honesty, hard work, kindness, and above all, love, remained constant. They were the bedrock upon which everything else was built. And sometimes, on particularly beautiful evenings when the sunset painted the sky in impossible colors, and the stars began to appear one by one, people swore they could see two figures sitting on the old porch. A man and a woman, holding hands, looking out at the land they had loved, together for eternity in the place they had made their own. A broken wagon wheel. A rancher riding home. A woman needing directions. Such simple things, such ordinary moments, but from them had grown something extraordinary. A love that had weathered every storm, overcome every obstacle, and created a legacy that would endure for generations. Fiona had arrived needing directions to town. Xavier had become the town she never left, the home she had always been searching for, the love she had never dared to dream possible. And together, they had built something that would last long after they were gone. Not just a ranch or a family, but a testament to the power of love, the importance of kindness, and the magic that can happen when two people find each other against all odds and choose to build a life together. Their story ended as all stories must, but their love lived on. In the land they had worked, in the children they had raised, in the values they had instilled, in the example they had set. They had lived fully, loved deeply, and left the world better than they had found it. And really, what more could anyone ask from a life well lived?